Hello everyone, Dave Landry here from DaveLandry.com. This is Trading Simplified. So, what are we going to talk about? Well, a couple of weeks ago, I was talking about thinking like a trade, and I realized that series could probably go on for a long, long time. And at some point, I had to end it. And so I ended it with, Am I thinking like a trader? And that led me to what I think will become our next series, Finding Your Trading Answers through questions, and that'll make a lot more sense in a few minutes. Now, I woke up this morning thinking that before I get into all of that, this is something that you're really going to need a lot of to trade, and that'll make sense too in just one second. And if I could do it, so could you. I'm going to show you just one example of a stock we've been in for a long, long time. In housekeeping, I do take requests. If there's something that you want me to cover, please let me know. If I can't cover it within this somewhat limited format, meaning limited in time, I can cover it in my Thursday shows, which are a little bit more open-ended. If you need to reach me, DaveLandry.com/contact. If you want the slides from this presentation and all the other presentations, and enough stuff to keep you busy for a long, long time, go to DaveLandry.com/StockCharts and put your information in. I'll give you all three of my books and PDF format and give you limited access to the members area. Essentially enough stuff to keep you busy for a long time. Now I want to talk about mystery charts and the methodology in action. In fact, this week we don't have a mystery chart. I'm going to follow up on one from prior weeks next week, and that's MTTR, in case you want to check it out and see what it's doing or not doing. What it's not doing today. I took these slides from Trading Full Circle, which is a course I did a few years ago. And trading done properly all boils down to patience, if you think about it. Whenever I'm doing research and working on a presentation, the first thing I often do is I reach for distilled wisdom. Now, I don't know if this is in print. I bought this copy a few years back on eBay, and as you can see, it's worn and pretty torn. It's Distilled Wisdom, A.A. Montapert. And there's some good stuff in here. And a lot of it applies to trading, which I think is pretty cool, and life, of course. Patience denotes calm endurance or self-possession. Patience is the capacity to realize that all conditions and situations are only temporary. Well, right now, it doesn't seem temporary because the market's been having a hard time finding its way, as you'll see in a few minutes, for about a month. And if you exercise forbearance and remain cool, calm, and collected, the most trying ones will right themselves. Patience teaches us how to grin and bear. Trials, tribulations, troubles, obstacles, delays, disappointments, and failures are only stalking shadows that instantly disappear in the light of patience. And your patience possesses ye your souls. Earl Prevet, kind of reminds me of that Cofete or whatever tweet from a few years back. Now, I'm not a huge fan of Warren Buffett being a trader, and he's a value guy who tends to buy and hold. And my problem with someone like Buffett or value guys is that if the market goes down 50%, their funds are going to go down 50% or more. And if you go in and plot Berkshire Hathaway, you'll see every now and then it loses half its value. And I guess that's just value investing. But even though I'm not a fan of that type of investing, you can learn a lot from Warren Buffett. And where I got this quote was in Poor Charlie's Almanac, The Wit and Wisdom of Charles T. Munger. Weighs about 20 pounds. And it's a pretty good book. I'd recommend that you read it. And one of the things that Munger said, that Buffett said, was, I could improve your ultimate financial welfare by giving you a ticket with only 20 slots in it so that you had 20 punches, representing all investments that you can make in a lifetime. And once you punched through the card, you couldn't make any more investments at all. Under those rules, you'd really think carefully about what you did, and you'd be forced to load up on what you really thought about, so you do so much better. Now, I would scratch out the so you would be forced to load up on what you really thought about as a trader, because you definitely don't want to put too much into one position. And even though Mr. Buffett is a value guy, speaking along the terms of investing in things that you would hold forever, I think this type of reasoning could work in trading. And one thing I've been thinking about a lot lately is along the lines of what Mr. Buffett said is if you only had, let's say, 10 tickets, and since you're a trader, not over your lifetime, let's say over so many months, what would it look like if you could only make those 10 trades? Now, I'm talking about my core trading methodology, although the intraday trading that I often do, maybe I should start the week with 10 tickets and see how I turn up. Anyway, so I finally broke down and bought some tickets to play around with, and I think that longer term it would be fun to, especially the clients that are very interested in the methodology, that are really excited about it, and the sponges out there, maybe work out some deal where they could buy tickets from me and they'd have to cash one in every time that they trade. And I would, not that the Grand Poobah, but I would approve that trade and look for things like, is the stock trading cleanly? And some of the things that we're going to talk about next week and possibly a little bit in this presentation. Now, one thing I often say is trading done properly can be quite boring. You're either waiting for setups or you're waiting for the market to move. Now, if you look at the open portfolio, this is a snapshot from last week. Notice that APG up here at the top. We've been in that for over a year now. Today is August 3rd. This is being recorded August 3rd. This was put on way back in July of 2020. And you can see that the first couple of weeks it did okay, and it hit that profit target. It took a little while to get there. It wasn't exactly a straight line up, but it worked out okay. And at that point, as you know, go back and watch the money management shows, we sell half of the position, and the stop goes to break even. And then you trail a stop higher. But you could see a lot of this trade you were waiting, and you were probably also thinking, ugh, as you give up those open profits along the way. Now, this is not to say that all trades come back, but it shows you that if you have a fairly liberal stop in place, especially if you let that stop widen out over time, as it moves more and more in your favor, of course, you're able to ride out some of these corrections and position yourself to be more of a longer-term trader. And when somebody says, what's your holding period? I always say 10 years, hopefully longer. Meaning that if I get in a position, I want to be in that position a long, long time. And that's where the real money is, in those longer-term trades. And just last week, it had a little bit of a pop, and I wanted to show you this last week. Didn't get around to doing a show due to crazy markets and other deadlines and such. But anyway, it's kind of flat still from where it is. So here we go, one more week of this stock not doing anything. I can almost guarantee that most of my clients have probably given up on this trade on one of those prior spills just because we're all not that patient. Now, how am I still in it? Well, it's in my service, and that's what my service says to do, so I follow that best I can. What would the world be without a hypothetical question, said Mr. Wright, but I would wonder whether or not I would have given up on that one a long time ago, and possibly some of these other ones in here that have been in here for quite some time. Now, the one thing I did want to show you, this is the open portfolio coming into today. Notice the setups down here, I have none, okay? And notice this date, 7/14/21. So since the middle of July, I haven't shown any setups to my service people. Now, the more successful you are, the harder it will be to be a trader because you didn't get to where you are by sitting on your butt. But a lot of times, that's what you have to do as a trader. But you can see since the middle of July, again, I haven't recommended anything to do. Now, I've told the story 1,000 times. I hate to keep telling it, but it makes so much sense. And it tells you so much about human nature. Many, many years ago, I was part of one of the first financial websites out there. I think the only other one was Market Watch, I believe, CBS Market Watch. And we were hoping to come public or go public shortly thereafter. And that didn't work out, but that's a different story. Anyway, maybe if that would have happened, you wouldn't see my photos again. But that's, I digress in my reminiscence. Anyway, the thing was that back then, by accident, I ended up doing a trading service, and I'm still doing it today. But long story endless, When I would not recommend anything to do, the salespeople would call me up within a few days and start complaining because they were losing clients. And one thing I noticed that when I was recommending crappy stocks, not intentionally, but they didn't work out, we wouldn't lose clients. Now, I wasn't going to recommend stocks for the sake of recommending stocks, especially when I personally wasn't going to do any trading nor take the setups if I were to recommend them. A lot of hypotheticals in that sentence. But I found it interesting, and that was my first lesson in people trade for action, or people want action. And I recently read in The Investor's Brain that they did a study, and I think the woman's name was Barbara Sellers, Professor Barbara Sellers, and the bottom line of the study was that people were generally happier owning stocks, even if those stocks went down. So there's something in that probably endowment effect type of thing, to throw a little behavioral science at you. And you've got to be really careful of that. And as I often say, trading often goes against human nature, and that's just one of those things. One of my favorite quotes that I've said so many times, I've actually been around people that said, yeah, like Dave says. I'm like, well, I didn't say it first. It was Jimmy Rogers. And I think it came from the first Market Wizards. I just wait until there's money lying in the corner, and all I have to do is go over there and pick it up. I do nothing in the meantime. When I was putting these slides together, I was thinking I need to have that chiseled literally into stone and put it in the office, put it in my office wall somewhere, so I remember not to take action when no action needs to be taken. Now, one thing that makes me feel pretty good about not recommending any stocks for a while is if you take a look at the S&P 500 over the last, let's say, month, you could see lots of zigs, lots of zags. We're going to sell off. It came back, and then it did lots of zigs and lots of zags. The NASDAQ composite, a little bit more closer to the type of stocks we like to trade, since we do trade a lot of four-letter stocks, although we have quite a few three-letter stocks in the portfolio. But anyway, you can see the NASDAQ was also all over the place, and maybe the Russell 2000, a little more indicative of the stocks we like to trade. And you can see it was really all over the place, lots of sideways action and a slide or two in between. So that type of action is not good for the trend follower, and now I feel pretty good about not recommending anything. And at the time, or over the past 2 weeks, every night when I go to do the service, I feel like I'm under pressure to put something out there, and then if I can't find anything, then I have to stay true to self. I have to stay true to the methodology, and just remind myself that sometimes you have to wait, and that's not an easy thing. As Mr. Petty once pointed out, waiting is the hardest part. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I finished up a series called Thinking Like a Trader, and I was thinking, how could I ever finish this series, because there's so much I want to talk about in trading and thinking like a trader. And then I decided, you know what? You really just have to ask yourself one question. Am I thinking like a trader? And a lot of times I go in and I'm doing crazy stuff, and sometimes I find myself chasing my own tail, and I just have to stop and say, am I thinking like a trader? Now, along the lines of that question, I started thinking about some other questions, and I think that your trading answers are in the right questions. I'm a big fan of symbolism, and outside of my office, I have a separate office from the main house. It's connected to the main house now. It used to be in a guest house. Now it's connected, but there's only one way in and out, and you have to literally leave the house, or physically leave the house, I should say. So it's kind of like I'm coming to work or I'm going back home, but this is where I work sometimes. Anyway, above the door of my office, and anybody who's a sports fan, which I'm not a huge sports fan, but you probably would recognize that as being borrowed from Notre Dame. Anyway, when my wife comes to tell me goodbye every morning before she leaves, when she has work, as she turns on her heel, she'll point to the sign over her shoulder, I should say, and say, "Trade like a champion today." And sometimes it kind of haunts me, and many times it helps me. It's like every time I go to place an order, I think to myself, am I trading like a champion today? And I think that's something that's important to ask yourself. you don't walk away with anything from today's presentation if at least you ask yourself throughout the day, every time you go to place an order especially, am I thinking like a trader? I think I just paid for your webinar, which is free, by the way. Way back when the earth was still cooling, when I was working on my undergraduate degree, there was a sweet little Asian man who taught a mathematics course which was required. I have no idea what the course was about anymore. I can't remember that. The teacher was more interested in teaching us how to think with our mush for brains than he was interested in teaching us mathematics. But that actually stuck with me, obviously more than the mathematics. And I've carried that throughout my life, and I was glad to have this gentleman as a teacher. But anyway, he was more interested in teaching us how to think, almost to a fault, than he was teaching us mathematics. And I didn't really realize the value in these lessons until many, many, many years later, especially when I got heavily into trading. But he would say things based on logic, like connecting the dots, for instance. And he said, if it starts to rain, I will close that window. And he wouldn't just say it once. He would go, if it starts to rain, I will close that window. And if memory serves, it was a nice spring day, and we had the window open of the classroom to get a little fresh air in. If it starts to rain, I will close that window. And he just made the point over and over and over and over. He goes, now, what can you assume if I close the window? And the whole class kind of drones like, it started to rain. No! And he would get all excited and said, it might be stinky outside. There might be a fire and some smoke maybe coming this way. And he went on and on. He goes, it might just be hot. And so I closed the window. So, okay, we're like, all right, whatever. And then about a minute later, he's like, if I have $5, I will go to see Mr. Mom. And then he repeated it over and over and over and over again. And then finally he said, now, if you see me in the theater watching Mr. Mom, what can you assume? And the whole class, once again, that you had $5. And he's like, no! What if someone let me in the back of the theater? One of my friends works there. What if someone sees me and I'm walking by the theater and said, boy, I really like to go see Mr. Mom? And they said, well, I have an extra ticket. Anyway, that's the kind of thing that he would try to teach us at least. And his point is that things aren't necessarily connected in a logical fashion. I never really appreciated this professor's trying to teach us how to think until many years later, especially when I got involved in trading. Because you can't always connect the dots. If A, then B. If B, then A. Because it's a lot more complicated than that. And as I wrote in the Layman's Guide to Trading Stocks, which you can get for free if you use that aforementioned link, the media is the worst at trying to connect the dots. And I don't want to digress too far. I know, imagine that. On Monday, stocks went down because energy prices went up. And then on Tuesday, they'll say stocks went up because energy prices went up. And it's like, wait a minute, which one is it? It has to be one or the other. And there isn't always a reason. And that's why we look at the charts. If you haven't watched the 8-3 Dave Keller's The Final Bar, that was a good show. And I like the way he talked about, you'll find out the reason, but it might not be until long after the fact. Now, the reason I wanted to give you that background was just to show you how this gentleman thought and how he wanted us to think, and also because, even though it's not 100% related to what we're doing today, how connecting the dots is a very dangerous thing. Now, one thing that he would say over and over and over again is, if you don't know the answer, then question mark. If you don't know the answer, then question mark. He would say that over and over and over again. And one day he was writing a problem on the board, and we're all kind of half awake. I think it was like our Friday mornings. Everybody went on Thursday nights. And half the class didn't speak English, and the other half of us were hungover. But anyway, that's another story. But he kept saying, if you don't know the answer, then question mark. And he had this problem on the chalkboard, and he put the equal sign. And we should have all known the answer to the question. And he kept saying, now, what's the answer? What's the answer? And I jokingly shouted out, question mark. The whole class erupted, and I thought I was going to have to go see the dean or something. And he turns around and he points at me. He goes, "Yes, yes!" And he drew a big old question mark on the board. Well, that's another part of his reasoning that I didn't fully appreciate until many years later, and that's the importance of asking the right questions. And if I take on a big project, or if I'm working on some sort of analysis in the market where I'm trying to figure out something, I just ask myself a lot of questions. And if you ask yourself questions, you're going to find answers. And my nephew used to say questions. And so I have a notebook that I keep called questions. When he was a kid, he'd say questions. And our whole family now says questions instead of questions. But anyway, every morning, as I have said many times, I do 3 handwritten pages, morning pages. And that comes from Julia Cameron, although I did do them many, many years ago before I heard of Julia Cameron. And I noticed that Dave Keller mentioned them recently in one of his shows. And very important that you do these 3 pages. And from that come a lot of questions. And from the questions come answers. And I can't emphasize that enough. Now, it kind of reminds me of what Kettering once said: a problem well stated is a problem half solved. So I'm thinking, if you want trading answers, ask the right questions. Now, one thing I think that is vitally important is that you frame your questions in a positive manner. So when you are in a drawdown, as we often are as traders, don't say, "Why do I suck?" Maybe ask, "How do I get better?" Why do I trade for excitement, as opposed to what commitment devices could I put in place? Now, I've done complete presentations on Acrasia and commitment devices, and you can find those on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/c/Dave Landry. While you're there, if you like some videos, then like the videos. And if you don't like them, go have no fun somewhere else. But a commitment device is something that you do to help you commit to what you are doing. And one example I've given 1,000 times is one of my trader friends was getting a little pudgy, as many of us do, because a lot of times we're sitting around looking at screens all day. And he decided that he was going to start going to the gym. Now, he knew someone who was much younger than him, much more fit, and also pretty broke, who was very dedicated about going to the gym. And he said, "Look, I'll make you a deal. I'll pay you gym membership, and all I want is a ride to the gym every day, and I want you to pick me up at 6:15 on the front porch," or whatever time. "And if I'm not sitting on the swing in the front porch at 6:15, when you drive by my house, you go to the gym, and I'll give you $20 for every day I'm not out there." And that's how he got back into shape. Now, this reminds me of a Tim Ferriss story where there was a gentleman who wanted to lose some weight, and he was not only Jewish, he was very Jewish, and the way he lost weight was through a commitment device. His commitment device was he wrote a check out for $1,000 to the American Nazi Party, and he addressed the envelope, and he gave it to a friend of his, and he said, "If I don't lose 20 pounds by this date, I want you to mail this check to the American Nazi Party." So, needless to say, he lost the weight. That was his commitment device. There are many commitment devices we can put into place in trading, and one of the simplest ones sometimes is just walk away from your screen. Put a stop in place, and then walk away. And I've done complete presentations just on that, and that's something that we can explore in upcoming shows. A negative way of framing things would be, "Why do I take such crappy setups?" as opposed to a positive way is, "How do I find better setups?" And I'm going to give you some of those tools over the next few weeks. Why does the market go against me so much? As opposed to, how do I become a trend-following moron? Now, you don't have to refer to yourself in what might appear to be a self-deprecating manner, but I found that after being called a trend following moron, it was from someone somewhat famous, or very famous, I should say, as a trader. He's a famous trader. And I was deeply hurt, but then I realized over the next few weeks, I lost money when I tried to outsmart the market, but I made money when I followed along like a good little trend following moron. And before long, there was t-shirts being made. I've got some buttons that say trend following moron. And a lot of my clients will email me and say, fellow TFM here, in their mail. So it really caught in their email. So it really caught on. A negative way of framing thing, obviously, why is trading so hard? And a positive way of looking at that would be, how do I make trading easier? And trading is not easy, but it's not nearly as difficult as many try to make it. How come I work so hard and seem to get nowhere? The question to ask yourself instead is, am I practicing deliberate practice? Deliberate practice is working to get better and not just kind of going through the motions. And I've written extensively on that, and I've done quite a few presentations. But the bottom line is, are you working harder to get better at what you're doing? Now, we're going to explore these in quite a bit of details in upcoming lessons. I think the most important question to ask right now is, how do I pick better stocks? Now, the good news when it comes to stock picking is 90% of the mistakes boil down to the utmost basics. And if you want to see a lot of those mistakes, you could go in and look at some of the older YouTubes that I did from the weekend charts. And the reason I say the older ones is over the last couple of years, a lot of the people that go to the weekend charts or up to speed on the methodology, a lot of them come straight from my Facebook group, and they understand the methodology and have taken all the courses and everything. But going back a few years, a lot of the people weren't really familiar with how to pick stocks. And they would ask about a lot of stocks that just had a lot of obvious things wrong with them. Now, I spent 14 hours talking about stock picking in a course, but I think that if you could get the basics down, I think you're 90% there. Then you just have to work with a little deliberate practice to get better and better. Now, I couldn't find the exact quote, but paraphrasing Michael Jordan, he once said that there would be a lot more professional basketball players if they would just focus on the basics. And I think that's very much true when it comes to trading. And I know that the majority of the mistakes that I make boil down to possibly FOMO or into wishing versus intuition, which is borrowing a line from Ed Secoda. I use that every presentation. I swear I'm going to try to make it through one without saying it, but today's not that one day. Anyway, so I think it's very important to focus on the basics. And while I was looking for the quote, I found this one. And you can practice shooting 8 hours a day, but if your technique is wrong, then all you become is very good at shooting the wrong way. Get the fundamentals down, and the level of everything you do will rise. So that comes back to deliberate practice. So you need to work at getting better at what you're doing. Well, that's my time for this week. I want to thank everybody for watching. If you need some more information, again, DaveLandry.com/StockCharts. I'll give you enough stuff to keep you busy for a long, long time. If you need to reach me, DaveLandry.com/contact. So thanks again for watching, and may the trend be with you.
Hey, Grayson Rose here with StockCharts. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, consider giving it a like down below, maybe leave us a comment, and if you're new to the channel, you can subscribe at the link up above. We're gonna bring you daily content from an incredible collection of technical analysts and financial experts.